So this session is going to cover an overview of the forms used in Rave EDC for Facts and Hope. We'll look at skip logic, computerized data checking, log completion, etc. A bunch of different things. We'll look at the electronic case report forms themselves, some eCRF completion tips, and then some printing and eCRF resources. So case report forms in general are used by Facts and Hope just for collecting data, and the data is collected in a couple of different ways depending on which study and site you're associated with. So first, we have direct data entry. Data can be entered directly into an eCRF. Both metadata Rave EDC and eData allow for direct data entry. Another option is to handwrite on paper CRFs and then enter into the electronic data collection program at a later time. And either way, the completed CRFs are then transferred into the central database. This presentation will focus on forms in Rave EDC. So the development of eCRFs involves a collaborative effort. To begin, the protocol data manager determines initial eCRF requirements and specifications. And these requirements are based on protocol specifications because the forms need to be able to collect data to answer the specific research questions of the study. Protocol data managers also take into account the regulatory status of the forms, the review considerations with statisticians, and consider input from team discussions. The development of these eCRFs has to begin early on in protocol development. So by creating the eCRFs, we start to kind of operationalize the types of data that will be collected, which can then in turn inform the development of the protocol. So then finally, the full protocol team has opportunities to review and provide feedback on each eCRF as it's being developed as well. And whenever possible, the use of generic eCRFs is preferred. Generic eCRFs exist in a repository at Frontier Science, and they're available for reuse by multiple studies. The benefit of using a generic form is that it's already been approved by the Network Forms Committee. And at the same time, this helps to standardize data collection. It allows for consistency between studies, and it's helpful for the sites and the study build teams. It is possible that a suitable generic form might not be available, and then in that case, study-specific eCRFs are developed as needed. And this would involve help from subject matter experts. New forms must be reviewed by the Network Forms Committee and must be CDASH and SDTM compliant. It is possible to reuse study-specific forms just based on the data requirements of the study as well. So generic and standard eCRFs are preferred, again, because they've already been reviewed by Network Forms Committee and have been tested and validated. So we can always add study-specific notes if we need, but typically we start with these generic forms when we're starting to work on the eCRFs required for a new protocol. And here's just a list of some of the generic forms that exist currently. Again, this is a bit of review from our earlier presentation, but the Rave eCRFs are only available electronically. This is different from the case report forms that sites have used in eData in the past because the forms are no longer printed and shipped to sites. Okay, so continuing along with form availability. Forms become available to you as they're needed within Rave EDC. And briefly, here's how that works. So visit folders roll out one at a time. The subject page for a new participant will initially have this entry visit folder, and the folder contains only a single form. In this example, we're looking at a participant from PH 400, and the entry visit folder has a PH 5803. Once that data collection time point report is completed, additional forms roll out for the entry visit. And those new forms are available in the entry visit folder. And at the same time, the next folder will roll out as well. So you can see, hold on one second. You can see here that at the same time that the entry visit forms, additional forms rolled out, so did the year one folder with that DCTR. Okay, so which forms roll out in the visit folders is based on some of the factors listed here. So protocol specifications, event-driven ECRFs and visits may roll out. If there's a new pregnancy, for example, you would indicate that in the relevant visit, and then another form might roll out to collect more information, just depending. Participant level logs, administrative forms, and laboratory tracking forms. Okay, so we're going to go through an example of a form here, keying it in together. So to begin entering data into an ECRF, you'll just select the desired form from the participant subject page, and the forms can be selected from the subject grid or the folder hierarchy. For this example, we're going to look at the PH5803 from the year one folder. And so in the subject grid, we have the forms listed along the left column here and the folders listed across the top. So the form in question would be the one in the grid there. In the folder hierarchy, you just click on the folder name to view the forms within. Click on the desired form. Oops. Again, note that there's only one form in the year one folder, and it's that one that we need. Okay, so I wanted to look next at some layout and data fields on Rave EDC forms. So the Rave EDC ECRFs are dynamic, and what that means is that as questions are answered, additional questions become visible. And these invisible fields will display instantly once that leading question is answered. There's no need to save the form or do anything special. The questions just pop up. So here we see an example of a form that contains an invisible field. And question one asks, did the visit or contact occur? Answering yes will result in additional fields displaying relating sort of follow-up questions relating to the leading question. Okay. So here we see PH5803, and at the top of the page, we see the participant ID. And this is a link that will return you to the participant subject page. Next to this is the name of the visit folder, and below that we see the name of the ECRF. Note that the information up here is automatically included in the Rave EDC forms, and it doesn't need to be entered by site users. Some of that used to be required as header information in eData, but it's going to be just pre-filled for you. Okay. So again, we've got the pad ID, the folder, and the form. Upon opening a form, your cursor is going to be located in the first data field, which is a date field. And you will just use your mouse and or keyboard to enter data into each field. So in the case of a date field, I think it's easiest just to click on the calendar icon to select the date of visit or chart abstraction. You could use the keyboard to just key in the date field. And then the tab key will allow you to advance to the next field as needed. The next question is step number, and it's already filled in with a 1, and that can always be left as is. FACS studies only have one step. And then if there are instructions for the ECRF, they're going to be found in this blue ribbon after those first two questions. So you can see here for protocol 400, the data collection is chart abstraction, etc. Good information there. Okay, so several types of data fields exist. We've looked at some of these already, but we'll just do this example quickly here. Question 1 asks, what is the reason for the report? And we can see that this is a drop-down menu. So clicking that arrow will open up the menu and we can select our answer. And once we have our answer selected, the appropriate follow-up questions just are dynamically added. So question 1A has appeared and it says, what was the participant seen in the study clinic? So for this question, you're going to just use your mouse to click on the radio button, and we're going to select yes for this example. And then based on our question, our answers to question 1, question 2 is not rolled out. And so you can see it's not even included on the screen. We just go directly to question 3. This is another change from eData where skip logic was displayed and you had to kind of follow the instructions for which things to answer versus skip. We get to question 3, was chart abstraction conducted? Again, we have another drop-down menu. And we're going to say yes, the review of forms was completed. Question 4, has the participant been hospitalized? We say yes. And question 5, has the participant completed transition to adult health care? We're going to say yes. Question 5A is dynamically added. It's a date field. And when we click the calendar icon here, you'll note that this time there are these unknown options at the side. This is not going to be found in the header. You have to know the date of the visit, but for other dates, there's going to be these options. So if all or part of a date is unknown, this makes it a little easier to enter unknowns in the correct format. You can just click on the unknown portions of the date. So for example, here I've clicked on day, the day being unknown, and then I've selected April and 2023 from the calendar. And this is what it looks like when I go back to my form. You can sort of just see that the date conventions are going to be followed automatically. It makes it a little easier for you. You can also type into each field using those date conventions that we looked at from the forms manual on the portal yesterday, if you prefer. Okay. So then we get to question 6, and it asks us to comment about additional information. And note that when you're completing a text field, there's a limited number of space allowed, a number of characters allowed. And if you exceed the character limit, your answer just gets cut short. So it will just stop typing once you get to 350 characters in this case. So just be mindful of that. And then also use the term participant rather than subject for facts and hope studies. So next, you may want to navigate away from this form by clicking on the participant ID. And this will return you to the subject page for the participant. And now we can see that icon is a filled circle. Also, if you kind of look down this column, we can see that there are more forms added to this folder. Okay. Once this form has been completed, we could print the form with our indicated answers if we choose to, just by scrolling down to the bottom of the form and clicking on View PDF. And then you're just going to print sort of using the commands within your PDF viewing program. Note that when you print from within the CRF itself, you can see those answers selected. Okay, next we're going to look at some logical checks and system queries that are built into the forms in Rave EDC. And this will go into a little bit more detail than our previous presentation. So logical checks and other data checks run continuously as you key your data into the forms in Rave EDC, and the system will flag missed questions, failed logical checks, and non-conformant data. So if possible, you should always correct these as the messages pop up. You'll get a notification right as you're typing, as you move to the next question before the form is saved. And if you can make the correction before saving the form, there will be no query issued, and the change will not be recorded in the audit trail. After the form is saved, the data check messages will just become system queries. So we talked about those cite from system versus cite from DM. Data checks will become system queries. So the first example we'll look at is missing data. So for example, if we were to skip over the date field here and just go right to the step field with our tab key, we're going to get this little quick message. See how it's not filled in? It's a hollow call out icon. That means it's not an official query yet. You can simply edit the information before saving the form, and the message would then be deleted. But if you save the form without correcting the data, the error will become a query from the Rave EDC system. And this is what it will look like after that. You'll see that there's an open query on the page, and now we have a filled in circle, and also it will be in your task summary. Here's just a few more examples of failed logical checks. In the first example, the date entered is before the on-study date. So this logical check has just been pre-programmed to make sure all visits occur within the enrollment time period. In the next example, it reads, it's indicated that the participant is currently taking this medication, or that the stop date is unknown, but the date stopped is not blank. Again, just the setup of the form includes a logical check to prevent users from making this type of error. So in addition to being triggered for missed data and failed logical checks, system queries can result from non-conformant data being entered. And when data are marked as non-conformant, it just means that they were entered in a format that the database can't accept. So here's an example of non-conformant data. It's a date that's been entered outside of a predetermined range. For example, June 31st is non-conformant because June only has 30 days, so there is no June 31st option in the database that's going to be unrecognized by the system. The little exclamation point icon accompanies the warnings about non-conformant data. And again, if the form is saved before you correct this, you're going to have an item added to your task summary, and it will be sort of considered, it will need to be addressed in the same manner as a query. Data is also non-conformant when there's too many characters in a text field. So for example, in the second picture here, I have height in centimeters, and it's showing me that I can include up to 3 characters before the decimal and 1 character after at a maximum. And my answer has got 4 characters and then the decimal point. So if I were to enter that value, it wouldn't conform to the tables in the central database. So that's where we get non-conformant. And then also, if data are entered in the incorrect format, it'll be considered non-conformant. So here I have a field that's asking for 3 numeric characters, and I've entered letters. And again, that's just considered non-conformant data. So when does a failed logical check become a query? Again, if the field is corrected before the form is saved, the logical check message just disappears. The form seen here was saved with the missing data. So now we have that query contained in the form status. Again, returning to the question, we see that icon. You can hover for more information. And then to address the query, you're just going to key in the correct information, provide your reason for the change, and then from the drop-down menu, and you're again going to leave that comment field blank. Unless there's some reason that you're not changing the data. So this comment field is for times when you believe that the data are correct and you don't think you should change them. You can enter a comment there and it will be viewed by the data managers. This is similar to what you're used to using the Resolve program for with eData studies. So if there's something that you're not going to be correcting, you just leave a message there and the DM will review your message and take the next steps as appropriate. So once you correct your data, you're going to save the form. And again, at this point, those corrections become part of the audit history. Okay, so form layouts. We looked really briefly at a log form before, but I want to show it a little bit more thoroughly. So there are two different layouts of forms in EDC, in Rave EDC. We have the first type, which is this vertical standard form. It contains a single record of per form. And this is the data collection time point report is an example of this type of form. It's laid out in a similar style to a paper CRF with questions just listed down the length of the page. Some forms in Rave EDC will follow the log form layout though, and these are going to contain tables used to record multiple entries at a time. I'm sorry. Okay. So some examples of these would be diagnoses and medication logs. And as we'll see, you can view the log form in portrait mode so that you're just looking at each record individually. Okay, the log form has the same header and instruction layout. And then we get to question 1, which asks, has the participant experienced any new ongoing or resolved diagnoses? If no is selected, basically you're just done with this form and you can save it. If yes is selected, you need to fill in the details about those diagnoses in this log table. So each log line here is going to record details about a single diagnosis, and those lines, additional lines can be added to the table using the Save and Add button. Moving from left to right, our columns read specify, status, date of onset, required hospitalization, admission, and discharge date. And for this example, we're going to use a diagnosis of thrombosis. Note the information icon in the specify column header, which states refer to the DMC portal for the facts do not record list. So I just want to incorporate that in this demo here. So if we're recording a diagnosis, we should first make sure it's not included on that do not record list. The list is on the facts portal under case report forms. And here's that list. Again, we looked at this briefly yesterday, but our instructions say that these should not be recorded on the diagnosis form unless they resulted in hospitalization. So if you're looking at this form, you can see that thrombosis is not included on this list, and therefore we can include it on our log form. Okay. So note that the first log line here has been completed with the diagnosis of thrombosis. And to report additional diagnoses, we can add rows at the bottom of the page Just select the number of rows you want to add, up to 10, and then click Add. So I just added one row. Here we can see that a new row has been added. And so now with row 2, we can add a new diagnosis. Log forms can be viewed in those two different modes. So right now we're currently looking at what's called the complete view of the log form. Alternatively, we can look at a single log line in portrait mode by clicking on the portrait icon for that line that we want to see. In portrait mode, data are entered in that standard sort of vertical format. And so if we look at the thrombosis line here, we see all that same information that was in the table, but it's all on its own form. You can navigate to other log lines using the commands at the bottom here. You can also add additional lines in portrait mode by clicking on Add Another Line. And then to return to that table view, you're going to click on Back to Complete View here in the bottom footer. Okay, information can be entered in either mode. So here you can enter information directly into the table, or you could click on the portrait icon, open the portrait form, and key your data that way if you choose. We're going to just enter a diagnosis of hypertension chronic to demonstrate data entry in portrait mode. So to begin, you'll just click on that icon, and then note that the header fields are already filled out because they were carried over from the log form. Scrolling down, we get to the questions from the log table. We're going to type in a diagnosis of hypertension with a status of new. With the drop-down menu, we will say no hospitalization was required. And then we're going to save the form and navigate back to complete view. And here's what that looks like. And then next, we're going to just add a diagnosis of bronchospasm acute to row 3 to demonstrate the data entry in landscape mode. Also, I'm going to use this to demonstrate a system query. So we'll type in bronchospasm acute and specify a status of new, and then save the form. So we can see here from landscape mode that there's a query associated with row 3. If I hover over that red icon, it's going to tell me that queries exist, and I should use portrait mode for more information. So clicking on the portrait icon, here's my query text. It says when status is new, new and resolved, or history entry, the date of onset must not be blank. Please reconcile. So again, we can correct very easily in Rave EDC. We'll just key in the correct information and select a reason for the change, and then save the form again. Note that the query disappears immediately from the form. Again, it's also been taken out of our task summary, so you don't need to worry about it anymore. Okay, next I just wanted to talk about adding some visit folders and forms for unscheduled visits. So in Rave, most of the time, all of your forms for a visit are located in your visit folder, and they roll out automatically for you. However, if you have an unscheduled visit, you need to create a visit folder, and then you're going to add in the necessary forms. And here's how you'll do that. You're going to go to the Actions pane on the top of the screen here and use the drop-down menu where it says Event, select Event, and the event that you'll select is Unscheduled Visit. Note that there are other options available in the drop-down menu here. You could also add additional forms and consent tracking. And of course, different studies and different user roles might have slightly different options available too. So the unscheduled visit folder now appears on the subject page in both places, the subject grid and the side pane. And if you were to click over here in the side pane, you're going to see that there are two forms in this folder. We've got the additional forms for the unscheduled or off-study visits, and we've got our data collection time point report. You're going to open up the additional forms form, and here's what you'll see. You can see that the form itself contains a checklist that lists all of the other forms for the study. And so you'll go through and you'll just check off which forms you need. And then once you save the form, anything you selected is going to be added to your unscheduled visit folder. So back on the subject page now, we can see our unscheduled forms ECRF is done and the forms that we needed are included. You'll just click on the form name to open it and start entering your data. It's also possible to add additional forms for a participant during a scheduled visit. So you do this by just going to that same menu, select event, and select additional forms, and then just click on add event. And a new folder called additional forms, additional, and then whatever the study name is, and then forms is going to be created on the subject page. And again, it's going to contain an ECRF that has a list for you to select from a list of all of the available forms for the study. So you're going to open the form, select any additional forms you need for the scheduled visit, and then scroll to the bottom and click Save. And those additional forms will be added to the additional forms folder. Just a note, this is a little weird. Additional forms are not added to the visit folder. So even though they're used to collect data during a scheduled visit. So for this example, if additional forms are needed during the participant's entry visit, they're going to be listed separately from the regular visit number 1 entry forms. So when you're keying forms for this single visit, you're going to have to open 2 different folders to key the forms. Okay, next up, some CRF resources available on the Frontier Science portal. These are going to be sort of specific things that you can use for filling out ECRFs. So first, we're going to look at the CRF appendix codes. This is, again, found on the portal. We looked at them briefly yesterday, but this time I'm going to demonstrate the use of them to actually fill in this routine chemistries 3 form. And note that this form is filled out via chart abstraction. So question 1, were any chemistry results obtained? We are going to select yes. And then we see some additional questions being added to the form. We're going to enter the date on which the specimen was obtained for part B. And then next we are asked to provide a value for ALT, or alanine aminotransferase. And this should be obtained by chart abstraction. Again, so our answer, note that it has to be numerical. We're looking for no more than 4 characters before the decimal and 2 after. Also note that there's a little I icon here that we can hover over, and it tells us to enter a -1 if this test isn't done. So for this example, we're going to enter 50, and this is just for the sake of having an example. We're going to just pretend that 50 is what was in the lab report. The next part asks for an upper limit of normal. Again, we're going to hover over and see that we can refer to the Appendix 76, Chemistry and Hematology Tests Revised. So this appendix can be found on the portal, again, under CRF Appendix Codes. And this brings us to a page of links that can be helpful. You're going to go to Appendix 76 to view the list of chemistries and hematology tests. And here we see abbreviations for each test, as well as the name of the test and required reporting units. And the final column identifies which tests require an upper or lower limit of normal be entered. So we can look at the ALT test, which was the first one we keyed, and we can see that yes, an ULN or upper limit of normal should be given for this test. You're going to find the ULN either in the laboratory report or in the participant's medical record. And so returning to the CRF, you would key in the upper limit value. So for this example, we're just going to use 40. Oops, where did I? 40, there we go. Note that some tests have no normal limit required. And if this is the case, you would just enter a -1 into that field. And that just indicates that nothing needs to be keyed there. You shouldn't leave anything blank on this form because blank fields will trigger those system queries. So next we need to assign a grade associated with this laboratory result. And so we're going to use the drop-down menu shown here. And note that we've got options 0 through 5, as well as 8 as possible answer choices. Again, if we hover over the icon, we get some good information. We're instructed here to use the dates table. And specifically, we want version 1.0, which was published in December 2004, with a clarification date of August 2009. It's in the same resource on the portal, the appendix codes list, and the dates table is available at the top of the page. Here's a PDF link that you can click. Sorry, let me go back. It's actually the text says PDF. That's where you would click. And it'll take you to this website where you will select grading tables. And then you're going to need to scroll all the way down to get to version 1.0, which is the one that we use in FACS. And once you click on this link here, you're going to get the actual grades dating, the dates grading table. Ooh, okay, beginning on page 16, we see the grading table for hematology tests. And then we actually want to, I think, skip ahead to chemistry tests, right, to get ALT. Here we see that a lab value of 1.25 to 2.5 times the upper limit of normal would receive a grade of 1 or mild, and a grade between 2.5 to 5 times the upper limit of normal would be moderate, etc. So returning to our CRF, we're going to just take a look at the summary of DAIDS scores one more time. Note that our scoring options include 0, which is within normal limits, 1 through 4, which would be those columns in the DAIDS table, and then a grade of 5 in the event of a participant's death. Also, we could use 8 to indicate that the toxicity grading scale is not available for this test. So anyway, since our lab value was 50, and that's 1.25 times greater than the upper limit of normal, which was 40, we're going to assign a grade of 1 to this value. Whoops. I think I jumped ahead a little soon there. Yep. Nope, that's it. We're just going to assign a grade of 1. So that's those CRF codes or appendices, sorry. Another really helpful CRF resource is the data collection form schedule. And this is a document created based on the schedule of evaluations and clinical assessments section of the protocol document. It lists which forms need to be completed at which visits in the form of a chart. So again, we're going to the portal. under case report forms and clicking on the forms management utility. Select schedules from the tabs at the top of the page, and then you're going to specify your study, and you're going to select the visit packet, or sorry, the desired schedule that you want from this list of protocol visits. And you can then click view to open a list of all the forms needed for that particular visit. Here's an example. Each DCFS is visit specific. So here's an example. We see this is for PH 100, and it's the dynamic surveillance cohort visit year 1. Below this is a note telling us that the required forms will be marked with an X. Forms that may be needed, depending on the study protocol, will be marked with a V. The first column in the chart lists all of the forms for the selected visit. And then in the next column, we can see either an X or a V for each form. Let's see here. So the first form is study trigger event tracking, and that is required. It has an X. And then next, the audiometric exam may be required, determined by the visit, the age, and or other CRF event-directed possibilities. So some of the forms notice are also blank in this column, and those would just be forms associated with special circumstances. So for example, the death report or the off-study report. Here we see page 2 of the DCFS, and we see some footnotes at the end of the page, and these further specify when each form is required. They give information to help with form completion. So for example, we can look at SPW 503. The dynamic maternal blood specimen tracking has 2 footnotes. It's got 6 and 11. And we can see that this is a required form as well. Looking down at the footnotes tells us a little bit more. It says for 6, refer to the SMART protocol appendices and lab processing chart, LPC. And 11 tells us this form's only required for biological mothers. Okay. Another useful resource is the form keying windows. And this is accessed on the portal under reports. The document is just a PDF that lists the keying windows for all of the different forms. Forms are grouped by cohort and by keying window. So in the example seen here, we can see all of the PH 100 dynamic maternal entry visit 4-week forms. Listed together. Okay, again, we've got the virtual learning room, which is always helpful. Some reference guides on some of the topics that have been covered in this workshop would include Rave EDC entering data, log forms, and task management. Any of those might be helpful to you. There's also a Rave EDC overview e-learning and some video tutorials that are probably going to be pretty useful. The video tutorials will go over the same information as the documents, but just sort of in a demonstration form. Okay, and then I know I've mentioned this before, but we do have those ECRF completion tip documents on the virtual learning room, and those will just give you a print matrix modified to be able to give you some helpful tips. And that brings us to time for questions, if there are any.